importantly, thank you so much for joining us today for this very important conversation about the recent executive order, the White House initiative to promote excellence and innovation at HBCUs. This is an order that we've been waiting for some time, and are really happy that it came out and that we can talk in detail about what this means to HBCUs, to HBCU students, to our partners, and also to the students that we serve. So we're very much looking to the conversation. We are going to focus on a few things. Dr. Harry L. Williams, our president and CEO, is going to do an introduction and welcome. Then we'll spend the bulk of our time getting into the details regarding the executive order, what it means and why it matters. And then Sharice Hart is going to talk a little bit about what's next. And Phil Jones, many of you know, is going to join in that discussion as well. So I'd like to turn it over to our fearless leader, Dr. Harry L. Williams. He's the chairman or the chief executive officer and president of Thurgood Marshall College Fund. He's been here for 7 years after running Delaware State University, one of our HBCU member schools. Prior to that, he was within the University of North Carolina system in a variety of capacities. Since he's been here, we've seen unprecedented growth. Many of you on this call are the reason for that. But we're excited to talk about the organization a little bit and what we have going forward. And I should have done this in the beginning, but my name is Betsy Burton-Strunk, and I'm our Vice President of Development. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Williams.
Well, thank you, Betsy, and thank you for those kind words of introduction. And I want to just say thank you to all of you who are on this call today. This is a very, very important call for you to have a clear understanding of where we are as an organization and where we are heading. And we are so excited to be able to share with you a very positive executive order that will allow you to continue the work that you're doing in supporting our students and supporting historically Black colleges and universities. As Betsy said, I am the president and CEO of this organization, and I get up every day focused on how we're going to continue to increase the number of students attending our HBCUs to be able to have amazing careers in some of your companies and organizations. So we're excited about that. And this executive order was a part of a process here at TMCF that we've been engaging for a minute now. Thurgood Marshall College Fund is a bipartisan organization. Let me be very clear on that. We work with both sides, and we're very clear on when an administration comes in, we go in representing our member schools, which you will see some data later on in this presentation outlining the number of schools that we have and the representation and number of students and the percentage of HBCU students. You'll hear that later on in the presentation. But I wanted to be able to just start this presentation off by saying thank you, and also to give you a high-level overview in terms of the role that we play here at Thurgood Marshall and the role that we play here in Washington. We have a strong government relations team with the sole responsibility of working hand in hand with members of Congress, hand in hand with the White House and the administration, to make sure that we are advocating appropriately for our schools, and making sure that our students are also in a position to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that this great country that we have in a way that people feel comfortable in doing. And I've charged that major responsibility for my chief of staff and also chief business officer, David Shepard, who you will hear from next. And David was part of the process and part of the team that went and worked directly with the administration on an executive order that will, I think, help you in your decision making when it comes to who you're going to partner with. And in this order, we'll get more clarity around that, be able to answer any questions that you might have as it relates to your company's role in supporting member institutions that we represent from that perspective. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Business Officer and also Chief Legal Counsel, David Shepard, who will give you a high-level overview about the executive order, about the process, and how it can support what you're doing. David?
Dr. Williams, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today and to give you an opportunity to hear about the work that we've been able to do in partnership with the Trump administration to help facilitate what we do as an organization and the opportunity that we provide to our students and to our institutions. I am David Shepard. I'm the Chief Business and Legal Officer at Thurgood Marshall College Fund. As Dr. Williams mentioned, I also happen to serve as Chief of Staff. I also happen to serve as Board Secretary. But as it relates to this particular conversation, my role is in leading the work of our government relations team. And in that capacity, I also serve as the principal advocate on behalf of the institutions we represent. And to give you a little bit more clarity on that, we are a membership organization, but when we advocate on Capitol Hill and in front of the administration on behalf of HBCUs or predominantly Black institutions, it's on behalf of all of those institutions. We don't exclusively do it for our member schools. With that as background, let's get into a little bit about the executive order. I found this to be an interesting question. I think a lot of us are probably asking ourselves today what an executive order is. Do we know what an executive order is anymore? And I think probably a little bit of education is probably in order. So let's do that. And as you see before you, Article 2 of the Constitution vests the president with the executive power over the government, including the obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. I know that was a question that has been raised recently, and there was some debate about what the obligation is where that's concerned, but this is specifically in Article 2 of the Constitution. And an executive order is a written directive signed by the president that orders that the government take specific actions to ensure that the laws be faithfully executed. Now, to give you a frame of reference, you see Abraham Lincoln referenced here. One of the most consequential executive orders in American history was the one executed on January 1 of 1863, which we also know as the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed enslaved persons within the United States. And so executive orders can be very consequential. But let's go to the next slide. They do not have the force of law. So basically, the way that executive orders operate is to direct the agencies within the executive branch on how to apply the laws that Congress has passed. There are occasions, however, where presidents have overstepped with respect to the scope of executive orders. Litigation has been brought. As an example here, the effort undertaken by President Truman to take control of the steel industry, which was litigated in Youngstown Sheet v. and Lubco v. Sawyer, was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court as being unconstitutional, and that executive order was struck down. But for the most part, executive orders are things issued by every president. I think there's been one exception that did not issue any executive orders about how federal agencies are supposed to operate. Next slide, please. So every president since President Jimmy Carter has issued an executive order on HBCUs. They always have similar themes about engaging our institutions, but they, depending on who the particular president is in office, be they a Republican or a Democrat, might have different policy focuses as it relates to our institutions. And so this executive order that was signed into law on April 23rd is actually the second time that President Trump has had an opportunity to issue an executive order as it relates to HBCUs. And this particular executive order is entitled the White House Initiative to Promote Excellence and Innovation at Historically Black Colleges and Universities. So to give you a little bit of inside baseball on the process, under the first Trump administration, I and my government relations colleagues had the opportunity to work with Congress and the administration to get a number of pieces of legislation passed for the benefit of the HBCU community and the PBI community, including the Future Act and the HBCU Partners Act. And it allowed us to establish a rapport with the folks that were working in the the first Trump administration. And so when this draft executive order, which is actually very similar to the one that, in some respects, to the one that President Trump issued under his first term, it was presented to us in early February of this year as an opportunity for us to review and edit that document. And there were certain policy proposals that we have been emphasizing across administrations, the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, now the second Trump administration, that we wanted to make sure to include in this document. One of the things in particular that we wanted to focus on, and because we understood it to be an issue in the early weeks and months of the administration, was distinguishing the work that we do at TMCF, the professional development work we do for students, the conversion of those students to full-time employment, building workforce pipelines, providing scholarships to students to help them persist towards graduation, to incorporate those things into the executive order and also distinguish them from the position that the administration had taken over those weeks as it related to diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. So we did an extensive markup of the executive order. After we did our markup, we communicated with the person on the Domestic Policy Council who has the education portfolio to explain to him the logic behind some of the edits that we had made to the document. And one of the things that I just highlighted a moment ago that we were focused on is the conversations that we had been having over years with corporate America relative to our partnerships, relative to the development, providing those professional development opportunities to our students, creating those workforce pipelines, and the need to be able to continue to do that and have those partnerships. And we made the point to the person on the Domestic Policy Council, this is something that corporate America still wants to be able to do. They have made that clear in the partnerships we have. We have a formal partnership with the Business Roundtable. In our conversations with the Business Roundtable, they said it was important to ensure that we could still do that. And so we made our edits. We had our conversation. About 3 weeks after having had that conversation with the individual, we were then read in on the language that was in the then draft version of the executive order, and it largely contained the language that we included. One of the things that we wanted to make sure that we were able to get into the final version of the documents is ensuring that we still had the opportunity as an organization to work with corporate America to have the kind of partnerships that we have had in the past. So at this time, let me highlight some of the language in the document. One of the things I should add, though, before I do that, in the conversation we had with the individual, one of the things that was specifically expressed to us was that it wasn't that HBCUs were not the target of the administration's rollback of DEI programming, and that the administration's goal was not to hurt HBCUs or HBCU students. Now, I can't identify for you the person who conveyed that message to us, but what I can reveal to you is a similar message was conveyed by Secretary Linda McMahon, who's the Secretary of Education, when she came to our HBCU fly-in at the beginning of April. So that has been a consistent theme coming out of the administration, which is also reflected in the executive order. So where that is concerned, there are certain sections of particular relevance to this conversation. Section 2, which says, it is the policy of my administration to support HBCUs in advancing America's full potential, providing the highest quality education, obtaining equal opportunities for the participation in federal programs, and making our nation more globally competitive. And this is in reference to historically Black colleges and universities and historically Black community colleges. To establish the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities, housed in the Executive Office of the President. By way of background, the White House Initiative on HBCUs has historically been housed within the Department of Education. Under the first Trump administration, that executive order moved it under the executive office of the president. Under the Biden administration, it had dual locations, both within the Domestic Policy Council and at the Department of Education. But this executive order formally moves it exclusively within the executive office of the president, as it had been under the first Trump administration. Next slide, please. So this is the language that is of particular significance as it relates to our partnerships with entities in corporate America, federal agencies, philanthropic organizations. And this is language that I specifically included in the markup of the executive order. I will submit to you that the language doesn't read exactly as I had written it, but the end result is still the same. And so let me read that to you for your benefit. Section 3B, the initiative shall work with executive departments and agencies, private sector employers, educational associations, philanthropic organizations, and other partners to increase the capacity of HBCUs to provide the highest quality education to an increasing number of students. The initiative shall have two primary missions. Romanet 1, increasing the private sector role, including the role of private foundations in subsection C, providing professional development opportunities for HBCU students to help build America's workforce in technology, healthcare, manufacturing, finance, and other high-growth industries. Now, I've received a question in the past in speaking about this issue in front of a different audience. Was there a specific reason why these industry verticals were specifically enumerated? And I said, no, it was just the administration's effort to identify high growth areas. But obviously the clause "and other high growth industries" sweeps in any industry in which there is a need for talent to fill roles within those industries. And then also section 3B Romanet 2, enhancing HBCU's capabilities to serve our nation's young adults by subsection A, supporting implementation of the HBCU Partners Act. And as I mentioned before, that was a piece of legislation that we had gotten passed under the first Trump administration. The president signed that into law on December 31st of 2020, if my recollection serves. And it was designed to have our institutions be more integrally involved in the federal government's research and development enterprise, including giving those opportunities to graduate students and undergraduate students. And then the language follows, including facilitating the federal agency plan process required by Section 4 of that act. Next slide, please. Section 3B continues, enhancing HBCU's capabilities to serve our nation's young adults by subsection F, addressing efforts to promote student success and retention at HBCUs, including college affordability, degree attainment, campus modernization, and infrastructure improvements. And then subsection G, partnering with private entities and elementary and secondary education stakeholders to build a pipeline for students that may be interested in attending HBCUs and promote affordable degree attainment. Now, obviously, the content that we have put in front of you in these slides is not the full panoply of information that's in the executive order. The reason why we've focused on the specific language is it helps to emphasize two things in particular: that the professional development planning that TMCF does with corporate America, with philanthropic organizations, with federal agencies historically, is still being promoted and supported by the express language of this executive order. This executive order is very clearly distinguishing the work that we do with some of you now and hopefully all of you in the future from the position that the administration has taken with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And the language you see in front of you now, where it talks about college affordability and students achieving degree attainment, directly relates to our efforts to provide scholarship dollars to students to help them persist towards graduation. To the extent that we do that individually for students, or that those scholarship dollars happen to be a part of a program we have with you to help facilitate that particular student's graduation, so then they can convert to full-time employment upon graduation. So at this time, I think that might be the last of my slides. Betsy, are there any questions in the chat for me?
So there are a couple questions. We're going to save those to the end. One of the things that I thought was really helpful, though, that David, maybe you can speak to, is many of our partners received questions from their legal counsel regarding the difference between DE&I and the DE&I executive order and how this comes into play. And I know you spoke to this a little bit, but perhaps you can just highlight a little bit about why our partners' councils felt solid about working with us because of the precondition for attending HBCUs.
Yeah. So, and let me hone in on that first point, or that last point you raised, Betsy. As I'm sure our partners are aware, but it's worth emphasizing, the only condition for being a beneficiary of any of our programming is to be enrolled at one of our schools. And as some of you may know already, but if you don't know, the demographics at HBCUs on average is about 75, 76% African American, but it's 24, 25% everything else, whether that be white, Hispanic, Native American, Asian. And so if you are enrolled at our institutions, that is the sole precondition, at least from TMCF standpoint, to be the beneficiary of our programmings. So it's not any different than, students attending a predominantly white institution, which has different demographics, and these opportunities being exclusively available to students enrolled at that given institution. So unless a partner is putting other parameters on a student's eligibility, as long as you're enrolled at our schools, you have the benefit of participating in Leadership Institute. You have the benefit of participating in DevCon. You have the benefit of participating in the Workforce Development Summit or getting a scholarship from TMCF. With respect to the DE&I issue, the administration's been pretty clear, I think, both in the executive order and in the conversations with us, where they have specifically distinguished our institutions, the work that our institutions do on behalf of our students, and the work that we do with our institutions as being separate and distinct from diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. We've now heard that message from our point of contact within the Domestic Policy Council, twice from Secretary McMahon in remarks that she gave, both at our fly-in in front of 38 of our presidents and chancellors, and at the ASU GSV conference that following week in San Diego, when she was making reference to HBCUs. So I think it's pretty clear at this point that they view our work and the work of HBCUs as being a totally separate issue from the policy position they've taken on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And I think if this audience, when they have the opportunity, will take the time to read through the executive order in its entirety, they will reach that same conclusion.
Excellent. Thanks, David. And I think we'll hold the rest of the questions till the end of the call, and would love to turn it over to Sharice Hart.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Sharice Hart. I'm the Interim Chief Development Officer, and I'm so excited to join you today on behalf of Thurgood Marshall College Fund. My focus is day-to-day is to ensure that our development strategy supports the scale and momentum that TMCF is building. And I do want to highlight that TMCF and our entire team, we bring to this work a very deep commitment to education and a belief that investing in HBCUs is one of the most strategic decisions that we can make for our country's future. So under our CEO, Dr. Williams' leadership, TMCF now proudly represents 57 member institutions, enrolling 85% of all students attending HBCUs annually. That's nearly 300,000 students nationwide. And we are excited to announce that we recently welcomed Hines Community College at Utica in Mississippi, and also Hampton University in Virginia as our 56th and 57th member schools. That is so exciting. Our network includes 44 HBCUs, 10 professional schools, and even 17 accreditation board for engineering and technology institutions, 3 predominantly Black institutions, and even 10 historically Black community colleges. This is across 22 states, as you can see here on the map, including Washington, D.C., and even the U.S. Virgin Islands. So this expansion strengthens our collective impact that we've built for over 38 years, and even ensures even more students and institutions benefit from the resources, opportunities, and advocacy that TMCF provides. So TMCF is executing an ambitious plan to increase the number of students that we support by 275% by 2030. And this is a direct response to the rising student demand and institutional need across our HBCU network. So the need is clear. 40% of HBCU students are first generation. And at TMCF, only 15% of eligible scholarship applicants out of over 15,500 received awards in 2023. So that means there are 85% of students that are eligible for scholarships that we are turning away year over year, not because they're not qualified, but because the demand is so great. So another point I want to highlight is that students that receive our scholarships, the retention rate is 97% among first-time, full-time TMCF students. That is significant. So scholarships are critical, but financial aid alone is not enough. That's why we're also expanding. So we have leadership development programs like our Leadership Institute, which many of you are a part of, as well as DevCon. And those prepare students to lead with confidence and also have the expertise to move on into the next phase of life. And then also our capacity building initiatives that help institutions strengthen their retention systems, update their infrastructure, and also re-engage stopped out or dropped out students. So with increasing enrollment pressure on HBCUs, the urgency has never been greater. And we must scale now. It's not just for scholarships, but for programs and systems that prepare students to lead, succeed, and create lasting change. And what does this mean for our partners? And so as you just heard David Shepard, our Chief Business and Legal Officer, state, the executive order explicitly encourages private and philanthropic investment into HBCUs and their students. And as Dr. Williams was recently quoted, this executive order should serve as a call to action for corporations, foundations, member of Congress, and state lawmakers to redouble their efforts to support HBCUs and their students. So for our partners, this is a moment to strategically align with national momentum and demonstrate visible, meaningful support for HBCU students and institutions. So now I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Phil Jones, who is the Associate Vice President of Development, and he's going to provide additional insight into our leadership development programs and how they are equipping students to become the next generation of leaders. Phil?
Hey, thank you so much, Sharice. Partners, I wish I can see everyone's faces right now, but I just want to say thank you again, as David mentioned, and Sharice mentioned, as Bessie mentioned, and also Dr. Williams. I just want to say thank you for your continued support of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. As David mentioned earlier, here are some of our signature conferences: Workforce Development Summit, Leadership Institute, and DevCon. But let's talk about the first one, Workforce Development Summit. It is a multi-day conference that connects our students from our historically Black community colleges with career opportunities and industry leaders, but also equip them with professional development. We launched this program in January of 2025, just a few months ago. It was so successful that we're going to do another one this fall, November 12th through the 15th in Birmingham, Alabama. Our flagship conference, Leadership Institute. This is for our juniors and seniors. We're preparing these young leaders for internships and job opportunities. Again, our flagship conference, we're going to have over 85 corporate partners and corporations from all over the country coming to this conference to get these students, receive these students for internships and job opportunities. This conference will be held in Washington, D.C. this October from the 1st through the 4th in Washington, D.C. at the Marriott Marquis. And of course, one of our newest conferences, DevCon. DevCon is short for Development Conference. This is for our freshmen and sophomores attending all HBCUs, public and private. And again, we're equipping these students with professional development, upskilling opportunities. So they're going to go through resume writing, interviewing skills, dinner etiquette, elevator pitching, resume building. So we want to ensure that we, again, as David mentioned, Bessie mentioned, Sharice mentioned, we want to equip with our students with as much professional development as we can. And lastly, scholarships. Sharice just mentioned this. It is critical, as many of you don't know, that the Thurgood Marshall College Fund was founded on scholarships. And I just want to read a little bit of section of this highlight. HBCU students borrow 30% more than students attending PWIs. Over 65% of HBCU students take out student loans, and over 90% receive some form of financial aid. And since the inception of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund in 1987, we have awarded over $500 million in scholarships. So it is critical that we lend your support to continue to help educate our students and graduate our students through scholarships. So I thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Sharice, and we're going to close out this this great meeting. And thank you again for everybody attending.
Great, great. So thank you so much, Phil. If you're interested in learning more or supporting a specific initiative or even exploring a deeper partnership, we would certainly love to hear from you. Please feel free to contact Phil Jones or Betsy Burton-Strunk at the email addresses listed here. And we're happy to help identify the right engagement opportunities for you, your organization, or even your network. So thank you for your time and for your continued interest in our work at Thurgood Marshall College Fund. As we look ahead to the future, we are so grateful for your partnership and advocacy, and it's so exciting to see some familiar partners in this work on the call today. And we're excited to continue talking about what we can accomplish together. We hope today's presentation has shown how TMCF is scaling with strategy, purpose, and a sense of urgency, and we look forward to keeping you close as we move forward. Thank you again. We look forward to what's next together, and I will now pass it back to Betsy Burton-Strunk, VP of Development, to launch our question and answer session. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sharice. And thank you everybody again for being here. Some of the questions came through in the chat. I was glad that one of the questions was the one that David answered. If you like to go ahead and put your questions in the chat, we'll be really intentional and making good use of your time. I think that we can answer if you raise your hand as well. So, Phil, if you want to take a look in the chat and see, and I know that Sandra Buchanan had one question, which may have been covered, but that was, how does this relate to the hiring of HBCU students? And so, David, I don't know if you want to take that one. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but that may be helpful.
Yeah, well, the scope of the executive order, again, I would encourage everyone to take the opportunity to read it. I think is designed with the intent that the administration sees value in continuing to diversify the ranks within corporate America or federal agencies and the like. I think all of you recognize that when we have diverse employee complements, it helps bring better products to market. It helps create better widgets or better services for our customers because all perspectives are included in the products that are developed. And interestingly enough, when I happened to be at the ASU GSV conference the second week of April, at which we also presented, they were talking about where AI is now and how important it is for artificial intelligence to have input from all sectors of our community in order for it to be able to do its best work for the industries that are going to be utilizing that tool today and tomorrow. So what I take from the executive order is it's reinforcing the message that we've shared with you today and saying that the administration, one of the things that I take pride in, there's a language in the executive order about making our nation, this is within section 2, and making our nation more globally competitive. I'm smiling at that is because I know for a fact that's my language. We had mentioned it several times in our markup of the document. But I think that reinforces the point, right? I mean, it's that in order for our nation to continue to be globally competitive, every corner of our nation needs to be involved in this effort, right? Regardless of your race, your gender, your orientation, your religious affiliation, everybody needs to be part of that mix. And so that's the work that we do at TMCF. That's the work that our historically Black colleges and universities do. And I think that this document, this executive order, reinforces the propriety of that work as we have done it historically and as we plan to do it in the future.
Thanks, David. That's really helpful. I'm going to keep you on point here. The next question is TMCF forming coalitions with any other organizations or associations to strengthen its position?
So the answer to that question is yes. We have historically had a relationship with the United Negro College Fund because they are a member organization representing 37 private historically Black colleges and universities. Depending on what the issue in question is, we work actively with the American Council on Education. I mentioned in my comments earlier on that back in June of 2021, we formalized a partnership with the Business Roundtable. And if you don't know, the Business Roundtable is a trade association, a membership organization of the CEOs of the Fortune 250 companies in the United States and throughout the world. And they have made a commitment to TMCF about partnering with us to do the very work that we do to create those workforce pipelines. So much so that this post-dated actually the partnership itself. Tashonda Brown Duckett, who's the president CEO of TIAA, and Tim Cook, who is the president CEO of Apple, were the co-executive sponsors of our partnership within the Business Roundtable. So that, to me, communicates that the top rungs of corporate America are committed to this effort. Were committed before this executive order ever issued, and certainly have doubled down on their interest in continuing to do the good work that we have done in partnership with their corporations and with the Business Roundtable for several years now.
That's super helpful, David. And I know particularly through the course of the last several years, partnering with organizations like ACE, like the Business Roundtable, like UNCF, NAFIO, and the others, and to your earlier point about making sure that HBCUs support every type of individual on their campuses. I think you're doubling down on the point of everybody working together to be thoughtful about how we need to move forward. I'm going to take one more question in the chat, and then it looks like Tim Halpern has his hand raised. The question, David, is based on our increase in the number of HBCUs with whom we work and HBCCs, as well as just the general work we do supporting HBCUs, and in light of or in lieu of the DE&I initiatives, do we plan to continue to grow the list of HBCUs in our membership?
Not the Oracle at Delphi here, but I will tell you that the plan is to grow our membership as large as we can. We get phone calls, emails daily from unaffiliated institutions who want to become TMCF member schools. They may want to be members in a different capacity. There's an initiative we're working on now. We're not prepared to announce it. It's going to be of great benefit to our student population in terms of their professional development. And I can anticipate that all HBCUs are going to want to be involved in that in some manner or form. So the simple answer to your question is yes. We do anticipate further growing our membership to the point that at some point, all 102 accredited HBCUs will be involved in TMCF in some way in terms of professional development opportunities for their students, our advocacy work, our capacity building work, you name it.
Thanks, David. That's great. And another thing I wanted to say just in general about that is that for many of our programs today, even if an HBCU is not a member institution, those students still participate in our programming. So we are not specifically and solely focused on our member schools. It's just we have a membership organization and we want to make sure that we're helping as many students as possible. Tim, I'm going to go ahead and read your question instead of having you speak. Is it possible that HBCUs are so underfunded that they lack adequate technology, this example, to help students prepare for careers in AI and technology? And how can organizations, whether it's through raising funds or other initiatives, help TMCF?
Tim, I absolutely love that question. Thank you very much for asking it. I will give you one specific example. It has not been reintroduced yet, but there is a piece of legislation called the Ignite HBCU Excellence Act. It was introduced previously in the 118th Congress. The language of that legislation is specifically designed to build infrastructure, but in particular research and development infrastructure at our institutions. So to the extent that your government relations staff would like to partner with us in emphasizing the importance of that, we would welcome that support, because as you referenced, our schools have been historically underfunded, particularly at a state level, particularly for our publicly supported institutions. You can just look, we've been working on this issue for years with respect to our land grant institutions, and you can look at the 1862 land grants versus the 1890s, which are our schools, and the just stark difference in the physical plants of the respective institutions. But for our institutions, for our students, whether they be undergraduate or graduate students, to be part of what the executive order contemplates about us being more globally competitive. There need to be more federal and state dollars coming to those institutions to build that R&D infrastructure so our students can be on the cutting edge of what is happening in the global marketplace. And just to put a finer demographic point on that, despite the fact that HBCUs only make up 3% of institutions of higher education, we consistently graduate around 25% of African Americans with STEM degrees. So that's a pretty stark amount of turnover from our institutions who have historically been under-resourced. And another statistic, half of all African Americans with terminal degrees that are teaching in higher ed today got their terminal degrees from HBCUs. So and we're not talking about a population simply teaching at HBCUs, teaching at higher ed institutions throughout the country.
Thanks, David. It's always sobering to hear some of these facts and really helps reinforce the need for funding. One question that we got in the chat, I'm going to take, and then David, you completely correct me if I say this wrong, because we've gotten this question a couple of times, is Section 6 the revocation? The last part of, or one of the final parts of the executive order has a section called revocations, and that's really revoking the executive orders from the prior administration. So even though looking at it, my first reaction when I saw that was, well, this is saying the exact opposite of what I just read, but really what it's just doing is allowing the current executive order to replace the prior one. And David, if I said that not great, please feel free to adjust. And I also want to point out to everybody on the call, if you look in the chat, Talitha Washington provided the link for the Ignite Act if you wanted to take a look at that.
Yeah. Betsy, I think you said it perfectly. And just for historical reference, I think if you went back and looked at the executive orders regarding HBCUs for every one of the presidents since Carter, obviously Carter being the exception, they all revoked the prior executive order. They always want to institute their own executive order as it relates to whatever the community or issue in question is. The one thing I will note for the record, though, I think it's important for people to understand, and this gives you some sense of how the administration views our community. The executive orders as it related to Hispanic serving institutions, Native American serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities that had been written under the Biden administration were revoked within the first week of the new Trump administration. The Trump administration left Biden's executive order on HBCUs in place until they replaced it with this document. So they did not want to detrimentally impact our institutions or their work until they had their own document in place that they were prepared to replace it with. So I just, again, I think that speaks to the intention with which they approach this issue and the seriousness with which they take it. But the revocation of the executive order that President Biden issued is pretty standard practice in terms of executive orders that follow from subsequent administrations.
Great, thanks for that. I'm glad I answered that pretty correctly. We've got 3 questions in here. I think that we'll end on these 3, and oh, Terry just added another one, but I'm gonna just sort of consolidate these questions. So one of the questions is in relation to research at HBCUs, and I don't know if you want to speak to Carnegie classifications. I think another topic here is, and George, thank you for this question. I'm not surprised by it. How does the executive order impact infrastructure on campuses, if it in fact does? And then the last piece, and I'll remind you of these later, David, you don't have to remember all of these, but is TMCF on the President's Board of Advisors on HBCUs?
Okay, so let me deal with that last one first. Historically, TMCF is not represented on the President's Board of Advisors for HBCUs. The way that it is comprised is typically of presidents and chancellors of our institutions or people in different areas of industry. In fact, I mentioned her name earlier. Tashonda Brown Duckett was a member of the President's Board under the Biden administration. We, the United Negro College Fund, NAFIO, serve as advisors to the PBA, but we don't serve as having a seat at the table. So, but that also is not troubling in terms of our involvement, because we're doing the work every day, and the President's Board of Advisors meets on sort of a quarterly basis. So we're not represented there, but we are in the sense that we're talking regularly with our presidents and chancellors about these issues. Betsy, the other questions were?
One was on research and how this executive order impacts research if it does, and then the second was infrastructure like physical plant.
Yeah. So with respect to research, I mentioned earlier in the conversation a piece of legislation that we got passed in I think actually passed in 2019, but was signed into law in 2020, called the HBCU Partners Act. And although we could not get a specific line item of a particular agency's budget or a percentage of their budget to be allocated to our institutions for R&D work, it is specifically intended to have the federal agencies more engage our institutions in a more intentional way as it relates to their R&D enterprise. And so they are required to issue plans annually about how they're going to engage our schools. And what we were able to get into the Partners Act was congressional oversight. So not only can Congress oversee both the execution, both the development and the execution of their plans, but so can the administration. And the executive order, although we did not cover this in the slides that we presented, has made a point of saying that they are going to hold the federal agencies to their commitment as it relates to the effectuation of the HBCU Partners Act. Now, with respect to the research question, another question I absolutely love. We have been tracking the federal government spending in research and development dollars at institutions of higher education since fiscal 2017. The last year for which we have this information is fiscal 2023. The National Science Foundation collects this information annually, although the information trails for about a calendar year. Just to give you a sense of where things stand, the last fiscal year that HBCUs saw more than 1% of the federal R&D dollars going to institutions of higher education was fiscal 2017. Every fiscal year since then, it has been less than 1%. And again, I remind you that we make up 3% of all institutions of higher education. In fiscal 2023, the federal government spent nearly $60 billion. I think it was 59.6 billion at institutions of higher education. And all 102 accredited HBCUs only saw $537 million of those awards. Now, to put that in sort of a stark contrast, one institution, the institution that's at the top in terms of these awards, is Johns Hopkins University. In fiscal 2023, Johns Hopkins received $5.5 billion in R&D funding from the federal government, 2.6 billion of which went to its applied physics lab alone. If you do the math, you can see that there's a pretty stark difference between what all 102 HBCUs received and Johns Hopkins by itself, let alone the other members of the Association of American Universities, which all was an association of the Research One institutions in the United States.
Yep. Well,
And Betsy, let me add real quick. I apologize for interrupting you. That is why reintroducing and getting the Ignite HBCU Excellence Act is so important, because it'll allow our institutions to be more competitive for grant proposals in that R&D space.
Yes, thank you. And yet another sobering statistic, and I think, Daniel, that may answer some of that question. I know George had a question about infrastructure and physical plant. I know we're just about out of time, so perhaps we can take that one offline and talk to George, and any of the feedback that we have regarding that question, we will put in the follow-up. So I want to thank everybody for joining, for asking thoughtful questions, to Talitha for providing all of the links in the chat. That's super, super helpful. And I think as we go forward, what you'll see and expect to see from us, you'll get a recap of the organization, or of the conversation that we've had today. We'll send you a link to that so you can share with your colleagues. We will send you a copy of this deck so that you can share that as well. And we'll provide any other detail. Mac, I know you asked about statistics, so we can share some of those statistics in the follow-up too. We'll get that to you by Monday. I would say today, except for I want to make sure that we have all the stats that we discussed in this call, and I want to make sure that we're not inundating you with follow-up. So thank you again so much for your conversation, for your time, for your energy, and most importantly, for caring. So
Yeah.
we appreciate you, and on behalf of everybody from TMCF, thank you for what you do and also for what you will be doing. So have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.